This happened during my sophomore year at Millfield High. I'm 26 now, but I still check my phone every night at 2:13 a.m. Can't help it. It started with Marcus showing us this grainy TikTok video during lunch. Some kid from another school had filmed himself in an empty hallway at night, whispering about urban legends. The video had maybe 50 views, but Marcus was obsessed. "Dude, we should totally do this," he said, stabbing his plastic fork into the cafeteria mac and cheese. "Our school's way creepier than theirs." Tyler rolled his eyes. "What are we gonna film? The broken vending machine?" "No, listen!" Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice even though the cafeteria was loud enough that nobody could hear us anyway. "My mom works in the district office, right? She was talking to Mrs. Henderson about the old bell system." Mrs. Henderson was our ancient librarian who'd been at Millfield since the building opened in 1962. Apparently, there's this bell in the basement storage room, part of the original system from when the school was built. And every year, during the first week of school, it rings by itself at exactly 2:13 a.m. Tyler snorted. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." But I was curious. "What's supposed to happen when it rings?" Marcus shrugged. "Nobody knows. Mrs. Henderson just said the night security guards used to complain about it, but they stopped mentioning it after a while." That should have been a red flag. The plan was simple. Marcus had copied his mom's master key over the summer, just a quick press into modeling clay, then had a duplicate made at the hardware store. We'd sneak in Sunday night, find the basement bell, and film whatever happened at 2:13 a.m. Easy content. Sunday came around, and honestly, I almost backed out. Standing in the parking lot at midnight, looking up at the dark windows of Millfield High, the whole thing felt different. Less like an adventure, more like trespassing. Which, technically it was. "Phones charged?" Marcus asked, pulling his hood up. I nodded, patting my pocket. Tyler was already walking toward the side entrance, trying to look confident, but glancing around like he expected security guards to pop out of the bushes. The key worked perfectly. Too perfectly. The door opened with barely a whisper, and we slipped inside. I'd been in school at night before, for basketball practice, drama rehearsals, that kind of thing. But this was different. During those times, at least some lights were on, and you could hear the janitor's radio echoing from somewhere. Now it was just empty. Not exactly quiet, because old buildings are never truly quiet. They settle and creak and whisper to themselves in the dark. Our phone flashlights carved weak circles of light through the hallways. The familiar became foreign. Lockers looked taller, doorways seemed deeper, and every classroom window reflected our lights back at us like watching eyes. "Basement's this way," Marcus whispered, leading us toward the maintenance stairs near the gym. The stairwell was narrow, concrete, and it smelled like decades of floor wax and something else I couldn't identify, something stale and forgotten. Our footsteps echoed despite our attempts to stay quiet. The basement was a maze. Narrow corridors lined with pipes and electrical boxes, storage rooms filled with broken desks and outdated textbooks. The ceiling was low enough that Tyler, who was maybe 6 feet tall, had to duck in places. "How are we supposed to find one bell in all this?" Tyler asked, and his voice sounded smaller down here. We split up, checking room after room. Most were locked, but a few opened to reveal the school's graveyard. Ancient overhead projectors, boxes of floppy disks, a complete set of encyclopedias from 1987. The kind of stuff that gets shoved into storage and forgotten. I was the one who found it. The room was at the end of a particularly narrow hallway, and the door was different from the others. Heavier. Older. The wood was dark with age, and the metal handle was worn smooth by decades of hands. Inside, the room was small and cramped, filled with the mechanical guts of the old bell system. Wires and switches and junction boxes mounted on the walls like some kind of electrical spiderweb. And there, in the center of it all, was the bell. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a dinner plate, but it looked ancient.
tarnished brass that had gone green in places, suspended from a simple metal bracket. Below it, a wooden hammer hung on a pivot, positioned to strike when activated. "This is it," I called out, and my voice sounded wrong in the small space, too loud and too quiet at the same time. Marcus and Tyler crowded in behind me, both trying to get a good look. "Dude, that thing's old," Tyler said, reaching out to touch it. "Don't." The word came out sharper than I intended. Let's set up and wait." We arranged ourselves around the room, phones ready. Marcus had brought a small tripod which he set up in the corner for the best angle. I checked the time, 1:47 a.m., 26 minutes to go. That's when the waiting started. Have you ever tried to stay perfectly still and quiet for 26 minutes? In the dark? In a basement? Staring at an old bell that might or might not ring by itself? Every small sound becomes enormous. Tyler's breathing sounded like wind through trees. Marcus kept shifting his weight, and the floorboards creaked like gunshots. And then there were the other sounds. Sounds that didn't come from us. Somewhere in the distance, pipes gurgled and settled. A door creaked. Or maybe it was just the building shifting. Once I swore I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, but when I held my breath to listen, there was nothing. 2:10 a.m., 2:11 a.m., 2:12 a.m. At 2:12 and 30 seconds, my phone buzzed with a text. The sound was so sudden and unexpected that all three of us jumped. Marcus actually yelped. The text was from my mom. "Can't sleep. Hope you're getting rest. Love you." My hands were shaking as I typed back a quick response and put the phone on silent. When I looked up, Tyler was staring at me with wide eyes. 30 seconds, Marcus whispered. We all held our breath. 2:13 a.m. Nothing. 2:13:05. Still nothing. Maybe, Tyler started to say. The bell rang. Not a mechanical ring like you'd expect from an old system activating. This was clear and sharp and pure, like someone had struck it with perfect precision. It resonated through the small room, seeming to come from everywhere at once. But here's the thing that still gives me chills. The hammer never moved. The bell rang, clear as day, but the wooden hammer just hung there, motionless. I was staring right at it, and it never budged. The ring seemed to last forever, fading slowly into silence. And in that silence, we heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the hallway outside, coming closer. Marcus was frantically trying to stop his recording, his hands shaking so badly he could barely work his phone. Tyler had gone completely pale, his eyes fixed on the door. The footsteps stopped right outside. The door handle turned. We all pressed ourselves against the far wall, trying to become invisible in the shadows. The door opened slowly, revealing a slice of the dark hallway beyond. Nothing came through. The door just stood open, like an invitation or a mouth, waiting to swallow us whole. We need to leave, Tyler whispered, so quietly I barely heard him. We need to leave right now. But the doorway was our only exit, and something was waiting just outside. I could feel it, even though I couldn't see it. Marcus made the decision for us. He bolted for the door, pushing past whatever might be there, and Tyler and I followed without thinking. We ran through the basement corridors, our footsteps echoing behind us like we were being chased by our own panic. Up the stairs, through the hallways, out the side door, and into the parking lot where the normal world was waiting. We didn't stop running until we reached Marcus's car, and even then we sat there gasping and shaking for what felt like hours. Did you get it? Did you get the bell? Finally, Tyler asked. Marcus checked his phone, scrolling through the video he'd recorded. His face went white. What? I asked. "What is it?" He held up the phone so we could see the screen. There we were in the storage room, the three of us arranged around the bell, waiting. The timestamp showed 2:13 a.m. The bell rang, clear and sharp. But there was someone else in the video. A fourth figure, standing in the corner behind Marcus's tripod. Tall and perfectly still, like it had been there the whole time. The image was grainy and dark, but you could make out the shape clearly enough. It was facing the camera, and though you couldn't see features, you got the distinct impression it was smiling. None of us had seen it. None of us had noticed a fourth person in that tiny room. Marcus deleted the video immediately, but I still dream about that figure sometimes, standing so still, watching us watch the bell, waiting for something we'll never understand. I moved away from Millfield after graduation, went to college on the other coast, but I still check my phone at 2:13 a.m. every night. Can't help it. And sometimes, just sometimes, I get a text from a number I don't recognize. Always the same message. The bell remembers. I never respond. I've learned not to answer things that ring in the dark. But I keep the messages. 23 of them now. One for each year since that night.
I've never told anyone this story before. Not my parents, not my friends, not even my therapist. But lately, I've been finding newts in places where no one should be able to reach me, and I think it's time I finally put this into words. This happened during my freshman year of high school, back in 2019. I was 14, awkward, and desperately trying to navigate the social maze that is high school without making a complete fool of myself. I kept my head down, did my work, and tried to blend in with the beige lockers and fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly sickly. It was October when I first noticed her. Third period English, Mrs. Patterson's class. I was sitting in my usual spot, second row from the back, right side, when this girl walked in about 10 minutes late. She was pale, with long dark hair that seemed to absorb the harsh classroom lighting, and she wore this faded denim jacket that looked like it belonged in a different decade. Mrs. Patterson barely glanced up as the girl slipped into an empty desk near the window. No tardy slip, no explanation, nothing. That should have been my first clue that something was off. The girl's name was Sarah, I learned during lunch, when she sat down across from me without asking. I was eating alone, as usual, picking at a cafeteria sandwich that tasted like cardboard, when she just appeared with her own lunch tray. "You're in my English class," she said, her voice soft and oddly formal. "Third period." I nodded, not sure what else to say. She had these dark eyes that seemed to look right through you, and when she smiled, it didn't quite reach them. "I don't really know anyone here yet," she continued, unwrapping what looked like a homemade sandwich. "Mind if I sit?" Of course I didn't mind. I was grateful for any human interaction that didn't involve someone asking to copy my homework. Sarah seemed nice enough, if a little strange. She never talked much about herself, where she'd moved from, what her parents did, what she liked to do outside of school. When I asked, she'd just change the subject or give vague answers that didn't really answer anything. About 3 weeks after we'd started hanging out, something weird happened during fourth period history. Mr. Chen was taking attendance, calling out names from his roster, when he got to Sarah's name, except he skipped right over it. He went from Rodriguez to Thompson without pausing. I looked over at Sarah, who was sitting 2 seats away from me, but she didn't seem to notice. She was just staring out the window with that distant expression she got sometimes.
After class, I caught up with her in the hallway. "Hey, Mr. Chen didn't call your name during attendance." She glanced at me with those dark eyes. "He did. You must have missed it." But I knew he hadn't. I'd been paying attention specifically because I was curious about her last name, which I'd never actually heard anyone say out loud.
That's when I started paying closer attention to the little details, like how none of our other classmates ever talked to Sarah, even when she was standing right next to me. How teachers would hand back graded papers to everyone except her. How she never seemed to be in any of the group photos that kids were constantly taking with their phones. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Maybe Sarah was just really good at being invisible. Some people are like that. They slip through the cracks, don't make waves, don't draw attention to themselves. I should know I was pretty much the same way. But then came the day that changed everything. It was early November, and I was in the main office waiting to pick up a form my mom needed, when I saw Mrs. Henderson, the guidance counselor, frantically searching through a stack of schedule sheets. "I swear I had 15 copies," she muttered to the secretary. "Now I can only find 14. Without really thinking about it, I asked, "Is one of them for Sarah?" Mrs. Henderson looked at me blankly. "Sarah who?" "Sarah from my English class, 3rd period. She's been here since October." The secretary and Mrs. Henderson exchanged a look. "Honey, I handle all the new student registrations. We haven't had any new students named Sarah this semester." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "But she's been in my classes. We eat lunch together every day." Mrs. Henderson pulled up something on her computer, typed for a moment, then shook her head. "There's no Sarah enrolled in any of the 3rd period English sections." I left the office feeling dizzy and confused. There had to be some mistake. Maybe Sarah was registered under a different name, or maybe there was some computer glitch. These things happen all the time, right? That afternoon, I waited by Sarah's locker, the one I'd seen her use dozens of times. But when the custodian came by with his master key for some routine maintenance, I saw him open it. It was completely empty. Not just clean, empty, like no one had ever used it. When I saw Sarah the next day at lunch, I tried to bring it up casually. "Hey, I stopped by the office yesterday and they couldn't find your schedule. Weird, right?" She looked at me for a long moment, her sandwich untouched on her tray. She said, "Sometimes systems make mistakes. It doesn't really matter." But it did matter. It mattered a lot. I started doing my own investigation. I asked classmates if they remembered the girl who sat by the window in English class. They looked at me like I was crazy. I checked the yearbook photos from earlier that year, the ones they take for clubs and activities. I was in several of them, standing with other students. But even when I was sure Sarah had been standing right next to me when the photo was taken, she wasn't there. The breakthrough came in December, when I was helping Mrs. Garcia, the librarian, organize some old yearbooks that had been donated back to the school. I was flipping through one from 2009, 10 years earlier, when I saw her. Sarah. Exact same face, same dark hair, even the same faded denim jacket. She was standing in the back row of what looked like a drama club photo, and underneath, in small print, was her name, Sarah Mills. My hands were shaking. As I flipped to the individual student photos, there she was again, on page 127. Sarah Mills, listed as a sophomore. She looked exactly the same as she did now. Not 10 years younger, exactly the same. I checked the following year's yearbook. Sarah Mills, now listed as a junior. Same photo, same face that hadn't aged a day. Then the 2011 yearbook. No Sarah Mills, no photo, nothing. I sat there in the empty library as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The logical part of my brain kept insisting there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a different girl who just looked remarkably similar. Maybe the yearbook photos had been mixed up somehow. But I knew better. I knew it was her. The next day, Sarah didn't show up at lunch, or the day after that. I waited by what I thought was her locker, but she never appeared. I looked for her in English class, but her usual seat by the window was empty. For a week, It was like she had never existed at all. I almost convinced myself that maybe she hadn't, that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, created an imaginary friend to cope with the loneliness of freshman year. Then I found the first note. It was tucked into my locker, folded into a small square and wedged between my biology textbook and the metal slats. In careful handwriting that I recognized immediately, it said, "Thanks for being my friend. S." That was 6 years ago. I graduated, went to college, got a job, moved to a different state. But every few months, I find another note. Sometimes it's in my car, tucked under the windshield wiper. Sometimes it's slipped under my apartment door. Once, I found one in my desk drawer at work, a place that requires a key card to enter. They're always short, always in that same careful handwriting. Hope you're doing well. Miss our talks. Still thinking of you. The most recent one showed up last week, taped to my bathroom mirror. I live alone on the 4th floor of a secure building. No one has access to my apartment except me. This one was different from the others. Instead of a friendly message, it just said, "Room for one more in the yearbook." I've been thinking about that note constantly, about what it might mean, about Sarah Mills, who appeared in yearbooks for 2 years and then vanished, only to show up again a decade later to befriend a lonely freshman who paid attention to details. I've been wondering if she's done this before, if there are other people out there who remember sitting with a quiet girl at lunch, a girl who asked questions but never answered them, who knew things she shouldn't have known, who left no trace except in the memories of the people who were kind to her. I've been wondering if I'm the only one still getting notes. And I've been wondering, as I write this, as the shadows grow longer in my apartment and the building settles into its nighttime quiet, if Sarah Mills is standing somewhere nearby, watching me with those dark eyes that see everything, waiting patiently for me to join her in whatever place exists between the yearbook pages and the empty spaces where forgotten people go. Because the thing is, I can feel her watching me. I've been able to feel it for 6 years now. And lately, that feeling has been getting stronger. Sometimes late at night, I think I can hear her footsteps in the hallway outside my door, soft and careful like someone who's learned how to move through the world without being noticed. I think she's still out there. I think she's still waiting. And I think, eventually, she's going to want me to come with her.
I'm telling you this story because I need someone else to know. It's been 3 years since I graduated from Millbrook High, and I still wake up some nights thinking about what I saw down there, what I wish I'd never seen. It started during my senior year. I was in detention a lot that semester. Nothing serious, just the usual stuff. Talking back to teachers, skipping chemistry, that kind of thing. Mrs. Henderson would stick me in room 237 after school for an hour, and I'd sit there pretending to do homework while she graded papers. The thing about detention is that the school gets really quiet. Most of the clubs wrap up by 4, the buses are long gone, and you're left with just the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional footstep echoing down empty hallways. That's when I first noticed him. The janitor was old, maybe 65, 70. Thin guy with gray hair that always looked damp, like he'd just gotten out of the shower. He wore the standard blue uniform with maintenance stitched on the pocket, but there was something off about him. He moved differently than the other custodians. More deliberate, I guess, like he had somewhere specific to be. I'd see him walk past the detention room window around 4:30 every day, always carrying this massive ring of keys. Not just the regular keys either. I'm talking about old-fashioned skeleton keys, the kind you'd see in antique shops. They made this distinctive jingling sound when he walked, almost musical. After a couple weeks,
I started paying attention to where he went. He'd disappear around the corner toward the east wing, the part of the school they'd closed off when I was a freshman. There'd been some kind of accident there back in the 80s. A fire, I think. The whole section was blocked off with metal barriers and do not enter signs. But this janitor, he'd go right past those barriers like they weren't even there. One Thursday in March, my curiosity finally got the better of me. Mrs. Henderson had stepped out to make copies, and I could hear those keys jingling in the hallway. I got up and looked through the little window in the door. The janitor was about 20 feet away, fumbling with his key ring in front of a door I'd never really paid attention to before. It was painted the same beige as all the other doors, but there was no room number on it. No little window either, just solid metal with about 6 different locks running down the side. The janitor selected one of his skeleton keys and slid it into the top lock. Click. Then another key for the second lock. Click. He worked his way down methodically, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. When the last lock opened, he pushed the door inward and stepped inside. But here's the weird part. He left it slightly ajar. Just a crack, but enough that I could see a faint light coming from whatever was beyond. Mrs. Henderson came back a few minutes later, and I spent the rest of detention trying to act normal. But my mind was racing. What was behind that door? Why did it need 6 locks? And why was the janitor the only one with access? The next week, I got detention again, intentionally this time. I mouthed off to Mr. Peterson in calculus, knowing it would land me back in room 237. When 4:30 rolled around, I was ready. I heard the jingling in the hallway and positioned myself by the door. This time, when Mrs. Henderson left to use the bathroom, I slipped out and followed the sound. The janitor was already at the mysterious door, working through his locks. I stayed back, hiding behind a trophy case, watching him go through the same routine. Top to bottom, 6 different keys, 6 distinct clicks. When he disappeared inside, leaving the door cracked open again, I made my move. The hallway smelled different as I got closer to the door, mustier, like old books and dampness. I could hear the janitor moving around inside, but there was something else too. A low humming sound, almost electronic. I pressed myself against the wall and peered through the crack. What I saw didn't make sense at first. It wasn't a room, it was another hallway, longer than it should have been, stretching back into darkness. The walls were the same institutional beige, but the floor was different, older, like the original flooring from when the school was built in the 1940s. The janitor was about 30 feet down this hidden corridor, standing in front of another door. This one was wooden, not metal, with old-fashioned panels and a brass doorknob that looked like it belonged in a house, not a school. I should have left then. Should have gone back to detention and pretended I never saw anything. But something about the way he stood there, just staring at that wooden door, made me need to know more. I waited until he moved deeper into the corridor, then slipped inside. The air was thick and stale, like nobody had been breathing it for decades. The humming sound was louder now, and I could see where it was coming from. Old heating pipes running along the ceiling, vibrating slightly. But that wasn't what caught my attention. There were photographs on the walls, school pictures, the kind they take every year for the yearbook. But these were old, really old. The kids in them had that vintage look, with the hairstyles and clothes from maybe the 1960s or 70s. What disturbed me was that some of the faces had been scratched out. Not torn or damaged by time, deliberately scratched out with something sharp. I counted 17 photos as I crept down the hallway. 11 of them had faces that were completely obliterated. The janitor was at a third door now, this one at the very end of the corridor. It was metal again, but older than the others. industrial-looking, with a wheel handle like you'd see on a bank vault. He was just standing there, staring at that metal door. I ducked into a doorway, another room I hadn't noticed, and watched him stand there for almost 5 minutes, perfectly still. Then he reached into his pocket, but instead of pulling out his keys, he took out a small notebook. He opened it and started reading, moving his lips silently like he was practicing something. After a few minutes, he closed the notebook, put it back in his pocket, and walked away. He walked right past me without looking in my direction. I pressed myself against the wall of the doorway, holding my breath, but he was already focused on something else. I heard his footsteps fade, then the sound of the 6 locks clicking shut behind him. I was alone in the corridor. The smart thing would have been to leave immediately, but that vault-like door at the end of the hallway was calling to me. I had to know what was behind it. As I got closer, I could see that the wheel handle was slightly corroded, like it hadn't been turned in years. There was a small placard next to the door, but the letters were too faded to read. I touched the handle experimentally. It turned. The door was heavy, really heavy, but it wasn't locked. It swung inward with a grinding sound that made my teeth hurt. The smell that came out was indescribable. Not decay exactly, but something organic and wrong. The room beyond was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. There was a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows on the walls. And those walls, they were covered in documentation. Newspaper clippings, official reports, handwritten notes, photographs. All of it yellowed with age, but it was organized meticulously, like someone had spent years putting together a comprehensive record. The newspaper clippings were all about the same incident. Fire at Millbrook High claims 12 students. The date was April 15th, 1983. I'd heard about this fire before, everyone had, but the official story was that it happened during a weekend when the school was empty. According to these articles, that wasn't true. 12 students had been in the building. 12 students had died. There were photos of them, school portraits, just like the ones in the hallway. But these weren't scratched out. I could see their faces clearly. Young faces, probably juniors and seniors, kids who should have graduated, gone to college, had lives. But that wasn't the worst part. Pinned to the wall next to each student's photo was a handwritten note. They were all in the same careful script, like someone had been maintaining detailed records. The notes described where each body had been found, the condition they were in, and most disturbing of all, what had been done with them afterward. They hadn't been buried in the cemetery. They hadn't been returned to their families. According to these notes, they were still here, still in the school. I was reading the documentation for the 3rd student when I heard footsteps in the corridor behind me. The janitor was coming back. I turned off the light and pressed myself against the far wall, hoping he wouldn't come in. But the footsteps stopped right outside the door. I could hear him breathing, slow, steady breaths like he was thinking about something. Then I heard the notebook again, the soft rustle of pages turning. He was reading by the light spilling in from the corridor. I couldn't make out the words, but his voice was different now. Younger, somehow, like he was reciting something he'd memorized long ago. When he finished, there was silence for a moment. Then he spoke in his normal voice. "I'm sorry I'm late today. Had to deal with another one in detention. Kid was asking too many questions." Another pause. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." The footsteps moved away again, and I heard the vault door swing shut. But this time, there was a new sound, the grinding of metal on metal. He was locking it from the outside. I was trapped. I felt around in the darkness until I found the light switch. When the bulb flickered on, I saw something I'd missed before. In the center of the room, there was a grate in the floor, an old heating vent, maybe 3 feet square. I knelt down and looked through the slats. There was a space below, not quite a room, more like a crawl space. And there were shapes down there. 12 shapes, arranged in a neat row. They were small, child-sized.
I understood then why the janitor had been so meticulous in his documentation, why he'd kept such careful records. He hadn't just been maintaining the school's secret, he'd been maintaining them. I managed to pry up one corner of the grate with my car keys. The smell that came up was overwhelming. Not just decay, but something else, something chemical, like formaldehyde. I don't know how long I'd been down there when I finally heard the locks turning again. 6 distinct clicks, just like before. But this time, the janitor wasn't alone. I could hear voices, adult voices, having what sounded like a business conversation. Tried to keep him contained, but he's been asking questions. Can't have another incident like 83. Easier if we just transfer him, make it look voluntary. The voices faded as they moved down the corridor. A few minutes later, I heard the outer door close and the locks engage. I spent the next 4 hours in that room reading every document, studying every photograph. By the time I heard the morning custodial staff arriving, I understood the full scope of what had happened in 1983 and what was still happening. I managed to escape through a maintenance tunnel that connected to the main basement. I finished out my senior year without getting another detention. I never saw the old janitor again. Word was he'd retired suddenly in April. But here's what keeps me awake at night. I looked up those 12 students from 1983. I found their families, their friends, people who remembered them. According to everyone I talked to, those kids had been missing for days before the fire gave the school an excuse to seal off the East Wing permanently. And the janitor? I did some research on him too. His name was Thomas Brennan, and he'd been working at Millbrook High since 1982. He started just 8 months before the fire. He's still alive, by the way. Still living in town. Sometimes I see him at the grocery store or the gas station. He always smiles and nods when he sees me, like we share some kind of understanding, like he knows that I know. The thing that bothers me most isn't what I saw in that room. It's what I didn't see. Because when I looked through that grate, when I counted those small shapes in the darkness below, there weren't 12 bodies down there. There were 13.